Hi, I'm Sifu Kuttel, and in this video, we're going to be doing a technique from the Ming Dynasty manual, Dandao Fa Xuan. Now, we're going to be using a very long sword for this technique. This particular sword is the LK Chen Imperial Guard's Chang Dao, which means the Imperial Guard's long saber. And you don't have to use this specific sword or a very long sword like this. You can actually use a crossbowman's Dao, you can use a Miao Dao, you can also use just a katana to practice this technique. But this was something that was used with a big sword for long range. Now, I do want to make this technique as simple as possible to learn because there are some intricate elements to it. So we're going to be starting from a standing position. It's maybe not the most practical, but it's a good way to learn how to move from here. Now, in the manual, this is called the bury the head stance, and you can think of it as we're going to kind of put our head underneath the sword or like raising a cover over to bury our head. But this is an excellent technique, and this is something that you can see even into just regular single-handed Dandao, like this top sword over here. So let's get into this technique. We'll take a close look at how it's blocking as well as how it's cutting. And also keep in mind that this is typically against a spear. So in the manual, most of the techniques were listed as fighting against a spearman, but this can also be used against another swordsman or if they have another pole arm or a long weapon. Let's get to work. The first thing I want to start with is how the technique is explained in the manual. And this is leaving our left gate open for our opponent to attack. What this means is the left side of my body, you want to think from the center line, the left side of my body is the left gate area. This is just traditional speak of entering and leaving left side, right side. So I don't want to have my sword in a neutral position. I actually want to have the blade over to my left side in some way. Now, this could be from me simply starting with a single grip on the sword over to my right side, allowing my left side to be completely open to attack, or I can have my hand back already. I find that, especially with a long handle like this, a good way to start is just simply with a single hand grip. This allows the pommel to move behind our arm. So this would be, if we were doing a cutting combination, we could kind of start it from here. But if we're just starting from more of a standing position, which I want to just to make this a very simple and easy to learn technique, we're going to start with the blade just in a single hand, and we can have our opposite foot forward, our left foot forward, blade in the right hand. Now from here, the attack is coming in from this side. They think that maybe I can block on this side, or if my sword is over here, I'm now vulnerable for attack. And as this is coming in, I'm going to bring the sword over to my arm, come up and block. Notice how much coverage I have across my body with this block. The energy should feel more upward pressing, as if I'm trying to almost press straight up, but I need to be able to get, in case the attack is low or high, I need to be able to meet it with the blade. Figuring out when somebody is swinging, it's not always easy to know exactly where they're going to be going. This could be a high strike, this could be a low strike, this could be a medium strike. So without having to try to adapt to it in motion, it's nice just to keep that blade more up and down. What this also does is keep the spear on the side, so as it's attacking, I have a chance to keep that position, and now my opponent is open in between here. Now think of this as like you just opened a curtain. We just opened a doorway, we're going to step through that doorway. Okay, so let's start again from our position. I'm going to bring the spine of the sword to my arm, and I'm going to turn the blade so that I can come up and block. Notice the blade edge is facing towards me, but I'm able to look underneath it. So if it's right here, now I have a chance of running into my own blade. I want to get underneath to duck under the sword here. Once this comes up, now I can bring it around my head, wrapping the head, grab, and then step forward and cut. Now this can move very smoothly around the head. So once I block here, it continues around, and then I follow up with that cut. I prefer to keep the blade edge or the spine of the sword touching and resting on my shoulder. This gives me another fulcrum to launch the blade off of, but you may find that in motion, it just swings around. That's totally fine as well. But we want to be able to set up for a nice diagonal cut. When we're looking at our opponent, this comes around my shoulder, and then once we're here, I can now chop down nicely next to the shoulder. We want to go in towards the throat, okay? You can hit towards the hands, you can hit towards the arm, whatever's closest, whatever's in cutting range, okay? But again, we want to think of really turning that blade sideways so that we make contact with the side of the sword, around, get it over the shoulder, grab, then step and cut. Now the detail on this is very important, and first thing I want to mention is my opponent would not be this close to me. This is for techniques against a spear or a different long weapon. This is rarely going to be used at a punching range, okay? If my opponent has that little bit of reach, I would just stab him, okay? Now, this attack is coming in on the side of my head. My blade is across the body. I look open here. This is the idea that we're starting with, is I'm trying to lead my opponent to attack towards me from this side. And what I'm going to do is use my blade to come up and make contact. Now, if you want to protect your blade edge, there's going to have to be a slight rotation. But this slight rotation is natural once we start bringing it around the back. Now I can rest the spine of the sword on my back as I bring it across. This is a very common technique in Chinese martial arts. It's called wrapping the head, or wrapping the brain if you want to do the true translation or the direct translation. But it's quite easy to get into this position. Once I come up, I have this pressing against my forearm, the spine of the blade. I turn the blade so the edge is up, and now it can travel around, whether or not I want to grab and attack single-handedly or shift into the two-handed grip, which we're using in this technique. So keep that in mind. This is off angle that we're blocking. We're coming across, we're hitting with the flat of the sword. Yes, maybe it would dig in, especially with a spear. That's not such a bad thing, but once you dig in, it has some grip. So the opponent now has a chance to manipulate your sword just as much as you have a chance to manipulate their spear. So it's good practice to get the flat of the sword around the head. So if we want to put this together, we can break it down into basically 3 steps. 1 is bringing that blade up and blocking. 2, around the head, grabbing the sword. 3, step and cut across. Now, of course, once you're done with that cut, return to a good neutral position. Have the blade in front of you. Make an obstacle between you and your opponent. So again, we have 1, 2, 3. Return. Nice and simple here, okay? And again, this doesn't mean that you have to always start with one hand on the blade. This is very vulnerable, but this is a great way to learn how to set this up, especially as we turn the blade over, resting it on the arm, blocking, coming over the head, and then following up with our cut. Okay, so there you have it. Now, I find this technique to be a very important technique to know, as it is quite universal in Chinese swordsmanship. This is something that we can do with a two-handed saber, a very long one, or a regular two-handed saber, or even just a single-handed saber. This wrapping the head, transfer, and then into a cut is very universal and very important to know. Now, I do have to make a couple disclaimers before we get to the end of the video, otherwise I'll hear about it in the comments section. And that is, first, I used the sword down at the side with the single grip as a better way to teach this one. That doesn't mean that that's the only way to start this technique. You'll find that maybe you're ending a cut that's over to the side, then you can transition into this technique, because having the sword in a single hand and downward is quite a boastful technique and could end up with a lot of bad consequences for you. So just use it as, that's more for the teaching purposes of this technique. The main thing is we have that left side of the body open. We're leaving the left gate open, as they say in the text, for our opponent to attack. So we're trying to guide them to attack from this side because we already have an answer to it. Now, again, this is typically done against spear, but you can translate this into against saber, jian, or even knife fighting on a very small scale. We can use this for a quick wrist cut into another attack or technique. So there's a lot of versatility to this. Now, the second disclaimer I have to make is keep in mind that this is my interpretation of this technique coming from a translation of the original text that was written in the Ming Dynasty. So you're going to have very specific wording and colloquialisms that are there that somebody had to translate from Chinese into English, and depending on their knowledge of sword play or technique, that could skew how that's written. And then of course, my interpretation of this comes from my experience, so there's a lot of room for variance in technique from one to the next. So don't take this as set in stone as how it's done, but this is how, from my experience, I see it. And again, this is my interpretation of a translation of a very old text. And of course, that text had a single picture and it doesn't really show much of what is going on. So there's a lot of leeway here. Now, if you're interested in this sword or any of the other swords from LK Chen, I will leave links to those in the description down below. These are all from the Ming Dynasty. We have the Imperial Guard's Chang Dao, we have the Crossbowman's Dao, and the Qijia Yao Dao, or the Qi family sword. Hope you enjoyed this video. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, and I'll see you in the next.